Christine, you can start.
I have been studying parental alienation officially for about 6 years, and unofficially and unwittingly for 13. So my first introduction to it was from personal experience. I am not an alienated mother. I have a great relationship with both my kids and my ex-husband, who's their dad. And I then married somebody who was an alienated dad, and at that time I saw what I had no idea was even a problem. And so today, I thought I would give you an overview of where I think this problem is coming from and has come from maybe a different perspective than you've heard before, because I am an anthropologist, so I study people across cultures and time, and I also study our closest relatives, the non-human primates. So children are genetically half mom and half dad. They also have step, adoptive, God, and grandparents. But these do not preclude the need for bio parents. So is this an evolutionary fact? Yes, it is. So that's what I'd like to talk about right now. So first, 5 million years ago, we were a species walking around on the African savanna, foraging for our food through hunting and gathering. Very little hunting, mostly scavenging. And we were very much at the mercy of the environment. We depended on each other for survival, and everybody's job was important. Everyone foraged, everyone scavenged, and everyone worked to their capability. And the whole band raised the children. We were also egalitarian, which meant that everyone was important as everyone else. We did jobs that were different, but we also overlapped jobs. We were never predators because we are slow. We have no claws, and we don't have sharp canine teeth. And so it's really quite surprising that we survived at all, but we did. And we've survived to this day because we are cooperative. We are cooperative as a species, and we always have been. We are primates, and all primates are cooperative. Today, only about 1.4%, I believe, of the world's population still survives as foragers, and yet these people have the most to tell us about how we survive best in a very tough world with very limited resources and very limited tools at our disposal. Now I'd like to jump over to the primates. We are primates. And so what about other primates and how they parent? Can we learn anything from them? Well, when I began studying non-human primates, most of the information on parenting was about mothering. In fact, almost all of it was about mothering. At the same time, most primatologists were men. So men assumed women, and well, in this case, non-human primates, were essentially the caregivers. And only more recently, starting in the 70s, we began to have studies about males and what their parenting role was. And lo and behold, we found that males actually had a very important role in parenting. So I'm just going to give you 3 quick examples of our more close relatives amongst all the primates. First, baboons. Baboons are male dominant. And yet, they also have a huge role in parenting, and they are absolutely crucial for the whole group's survival. Then we jump forward to gorillas, who are our second closest relative. Gorillas are active parents. They do a huge amount of, male gorillas do a huge amount of parenting. And even in captivity, in the last 30 years, we found that the incidence of stillbirths and infant mortality shortly following birth and maternal stress and death was greatly due to the fact that males were routinely removed from females who were in labor and lactating. We now keep males with the females, and there is a much lower rate of childhood and mother mortality. Our closest relatives are the chimps, and there are 2 species. The first species is male dominant, but again, they play a role in parenting, and they are absolutely crucial for group survival. The other species, equally genetically close to us, in fact 99.9 genetically similar to us, are female dominant. And yet even here, where females are dominant, we see that males play just as active a role in parenting as females do, and neither bosses the other one around. Both cooperate and the offspring win. So where and why did fathers, human fathers, become marginalized, trivialized, even demonized? About 10,000 years ago, agriculture began. Somebody planted the seeds, and life changed forever. And when that happened, we think actually that it was probably women who planted the first seeds, because when we look cross-culturally and over time, fossil evidence and evidence from other cultures tells us that it's usually women who are involved in actually growing and food preparation. Males are more involved in hunting and harvesting. And so, regardless, we planted the first seeds, and that meant we were now looking after particular pieces of land, and that land had to be defended. So guess who became the defenders of the land? Men. Why? Because they are larger, because they are also disposable. Are they disposable? I'm going to come back to that. So the idea that because men were larger and had traditionally been the hunters, they became the defenders of the land. And as time went on, they became increasingly competitive because they were rewarded for being competitive. You could gain land if you were hostile, if you were aggressive, and if you could outcompete your neighbors. And with those rewards, we saw an increasing male power, and sometimes at the expense of females. So again, we jump ahead from that time, population grew, and the village became the state. And the control of the state became controlled by whichever male could outcompete all the others. But what about all the other males? Well, the other men decided that they didn't like this very much because this didn't work too well for them either, because they were soldiers. They were put into positions where they were made vulnerable, and they died in great numbers. But the trade-off was made. Well, you can control your women, but we will control you, meaning whoever was in political control of the state. And so women, sadly, got kind of the short end of that stick for a while. So war and men's status, the reward was for disposability. Those were the things that the early state situations encouraged. Doesn't work very well. So women were owned by men. This is why you see things still like female genital mutilation. You see death for adultery in some countries. You see abandonment by spouses for the supposed barrenness of their wives. Those things still exist, but in smaller amounts than they did even 100 years ago. So the trade-off for women was to marry. That's how they would access resources. And they were removed from the workforce after marriage to ensure that they did not rebel, and also to make sure that paternity was known, so that men knew whose kids they were looking after and that their hard-earned resources were going to. So women became the primary caregivers of kids, no longer egalitarian. Men were, meanwhile, away at work, and they were dying at jobs that make them disposable. Firefighters, police, in more modern terms. Men were only the disciplinarians of the kids. Nothing else mattered. No one thought of them as nurturing. Mom was the shelter. So eventually, as you know, women rebelled in a movement called feminism, and they got their vote, they became better paid, the doors opened to post-secondary education for them. And by the 1990s, we had wide-scale daycares in Canada and the States especially, and women became super moms, where not only were they now working full-time at higher-paying jobs, but they also could apparently do everything. And we forgot about men. Men were made increasingly disposable, except in one remaining facet of life, the finances. This is where dad became the bank. And not only that, the single mom became one of two categories. Either vulnerable and pitiable, because she was helpless, gender stereotypes all over the place, and unable to cope with the stress of divorce. And of course, she was innocent of any of the factors that led to the divorce. Or she was kind of cool, because now she was emancipated by men and she could handle everything. So what do you need men for? Men are redundant. And rewards for custody were written into law, so that if mom could gain custody, and we already have talked about that today, then she has sole custody. That means she gets the windfall at mostly dad's expense. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule where mom is the higher paid wage earner, but those are few. There are fewer of those cases today. And so the final straw, if you like, was that the rewards were in place, and they were financial rewards. And so dad became very unimportant, except in paying for his kids and paying for his spouse, who is supposedly unable to work. Now, as far as I know, when you become an adult, you make a living. So whether you are a farmer, or whether you are a forager, or whether you are an IT specialist, you're an adult, and therefore you're working to your potential and to your capability in order to survive. And so when we go back in time and we see that that was always the norm, there was a window of time where that was not so, and where women became highly dependent on men, not by their own fault, but that's what happened. And then both sexes ended up in a terrible position of imbalance where we are today. And when we talk about parenting, men are at a massive disadvantage, and only now we're starting with the younger generation, the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds maybe, who are involved dads, and they have every intention of being equal dads, and they will fight probably to the death if anybody tries to take their kids away. But you guys, for the most part in here, you're caught in the middle, in a way. You know, it's the transition in time between the old days and that imbalance of learned helplessness and the supposed male dominance that was supposedly overwhelming everything in the family, to a more egalitarian state again. So I have some optimism, because I see us returning not to a new way of life where we are going to become egalitarian, but returning to a way of life we always had until relatively recently, when we decided that the gender stereotypes would dictate absolutely everything in life, to the detriment of kids. So to just wrap up, two parents were and are preferable. They produce healthy children. Equal parenting reduces conflict, as Warren Farrell has said, as Ed Kruk said this morning. And equal parenting allows women and men to share the joys, but also the hard work of parenting, and it allows the parents to maximize their own potential as well as that of their kids. Thanks.
Thank you. What we're going to do is we're going to hear from each panelist, and then we'll take a couple of questions for the panel. So next up is Brian Ludmer. He is a prominent Toronto family law lawyer and founder of LudmerLaw. He is a Canadian authority on parental alienation, having been the drafter of Bill C-560, which would have enshrined equal shared parenting into law. Brian is the founder of Lawyers for Shared Parenting, an advisory board member to the Parental Alienation Awareness Organization and the International Support Network for Alienated Families, and I should also add an advisor to CAFE. Brian.
Thanks, Justin. I really appreciate Christine's historical background to where we find ourselves today, because where we find ourselves today is still caught in that vortex of gender stereotypes and illogic and lack of consistency. So it's very common I'll be asked the question, I've been an involved parent, I want to stay an involved parent, what are my chances? And it is hard to answer that question today. There's a substantial body of jurisprudence on equal parenting. and what the factors are that go into that, and a substantial body of jurisprudence about the maximum contact principle in our federal divorce legislation. And that, by the way, applies provincially as well. What's not very well understood is that unmarried partners, the jurisprudence is very clear that those principles in the Federal Divorce Act that we have today, the maximum contact and the friendly parent principles, apply to unmarried couples as well. So we go into the typical family law case with the following paradigm. Mom knows, and mom's lawyer knows, that at the end of the day she's going to wind up somewhere between 50% and 100% of the time with the kids. Dad's lawyer knows that at the end of the day he's going to wind up somewhere between 0 and 50%. And the way the case goes, with that absurdity in terms of perspective and what the playing field looks like. I have a case going on now where my client, the father, is accused of being controlling because he wants equal time with the kids. And the mother's case, of course, is she wants to primarily parent the kids, but that's not controlling. That's because she always was the controlling parent. In that case, the facts will not substantiate that, but it's just one example, a microcosm of what we face every day. That plays out against the following background. The social science literature today is overwhelmingly in favor of equal parenting. And not just for the reasons that Canada has, of course, Professor Kruk, one of the world's experts, and I'm sure, I missed his presentation today, I'm sure he spoke to that, but it's universal research across the world, overwhelmingly. Not very well understood by our policymakers who tend to get their advice from a highly select group of practitioners who are not in favor of equal parenting. And when you read what they publish, their advice, you could drive a truck through the holes. And they ignore, they're not giving the government a balanced perspective of what's out there. Secondly, the Canadian public, we've done surveys, and my predecessors have done surveys going back 20 years. The Canadian public overwhelmingly wants equal parenting when measured across any demographic, age, region, political affiliation, even gender. So strongly in favor, and in favor, those who are decided voters, so to speak, who have an opinion on the point, over 80%. And less than 10% strongly against. And that has been consistent for decades. It's not well understood in Ottawa. And I testified recently before the House Committee studying Bill C-78 and had meetings with various members of the committee. I was successful in getting the Conservative Party members of the House Committee to vote in favor of that amendment because the Liberals' Bill C-78 did not pick up an equal parenting paradigm. It modernized the statute. There's a lot that is good in terms of bringing it forward, modernizing and changing terms. But will Bill C-78, which by the way, ultimately made it through the Senate, he squeezed it in before Parliament ended for the current pre-election campaign. It's not yet in force, but it's received royal assent, so there's just some cabinet level thing I think that applies and then it will take effect. So all of that work, the First Amendment to the statute in 30 years, and they missed a golden opportunity to actually make a difference. I testified before the Senate committee as well, and it was obvious that they were not open to receiving this message in both of the presentations. And my testimony is posted on my blog if anybody's interested. All of these things are video, so you can actually go back and see the committee meetings hear the various speakers. There was no answer to any of the logical assertions that we put forward. Our papers, the various groups, including the one that I did on behalf of CAFE, are posted on the committee's websites as well. And if anybody's interested, just contact me and I can send them to you. At no point in the committee hearings did we hear an actual substantive response to the very specific points we're making. We heard two messages loud and clear. There is only one standard, and the standard is the best interests of the children. Okay, but that's a great piece of rhetoric. What does it mean? And does it play out in reality, in the real world? And the point of my presentation was, the statute may say that's its goal, but it's not meeting its goal. The typical contested family law case damages children almost irreparably, creates loyalty binds, wastes an immense amount of taxpayer resources for this system, and mortgages the family's future, all over a contest of who can control the children. And again, it is the typical father position that they just want to be a principal parent. They don't want to be marginalized. They don't want to become a visitor in their child's lives. They don't want the rule of a favorite uncle where we come and we see a couple of times a month. They want to be the same parent that they were before, or they may even want to be a better parent than they were before. And now they have the opportunity because they'll have private time with the children, and that's to be lauded. So the where we are today is you really have to do an incredible job of lawyering, marshalling facts, collateral affidavits, and having an extensive body of law, and argue and push just to get a father equal parenting time. And I commend those who stay the course in the current system, but the current system is irreparably broken. And Ottawa, but for the Conservatives, doesn't want to hear. And I'll give you an example. What happens at the outset of a typical family law case? One parent tries to control the children. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and if you want to see them, you're going to sign a piece of paper that you will return them to me by such and such a time, and then you have to spend money going through the lawyers to figure out the next time you're going to see them. And this chaos, which is also very traumatic for the children, will extend until somebody starts a case, you get past your first case conference, and then you have your first scheduled motion, and there can be an initial parenting plan. Somebody's trying to establish an artificial status quo post-separation. Guess who it is most of the time? And, you know, I see a lot of heads bobbing saying it must be the mother. No, it's the more powerful, the less conciliatory of the two parents. The one who will try through force and possession dominate things, even though the Children's Law Reform Act in Ontario says that on separation, each parent is entitled to the same time. There is no custodial parent. Nobody can assert that until there's a first court order, and that may be 6 to 8 months post-separation, given the typical timeline of a typical case. And so I'm trying to explain this in Ottawa, and there's a lot of head bobbing, a lot of people say, wow, I didn't know it was that bad. And okay, so is your current system, what does your current system have to say about that? It's irretrievably broken. And this sort of chaos, and involving police, children's aid societies, for the first time, they've never heard of this family before. Family separates, chaos, false allegations, all kinds of public resources being wasted because you guys don't have a simple rule on separation. It's clear as day, 50-50. until a court decides otherwise. Even that, forget about permanently, but at least a starting point. And you got to do something about it. And Bill C-78 is entirely silent on that. It will make no change whatsoever in the chaos and the waste that we endure today. And that's most unfortunate. So the takeaway from this is that despite all of those studies, very expensive committee meetings, etc., we will have the same family law system going forward that we do today, the one that everybody acknowledges is completely broken. So you all know what to do in the coming election. Make your voices heard. This is an election issue. We will, Justin and I will be talking about it, be funding another public interest poll, and we're going to survey this, we're going to nail it down, and then we're going to have a press campaign to get the word out, because this should be an election issue. We should all be making a lot of noise about it for the sake of our children. So, without further ado, I will turn it over to our next speaker.
Do a quick introduction, then we'll have Oren speak. So our last panelist is Oren Amitay. He is a registered psychologist who has been trained in and uses 8 orientations and therapies. Outside of his therapeutic work, he's recognized as an expert witness in Ontario courts. He's taught at 5 universities, and he's frequently sought out for TV, radio, newspaper, and internet interviews on a regular basis. Oren?
Thank you. So I'm going to start off with a question. Don't answer it, but just imagine what you would say if somebody said, thank you. Imagine somebody says to you, I'm going to let my daughter go out tonight. I want her to come and encourage her to get high, get drunk, go out and party, walk home late at night, because it's unfair to say that women should be careful. Rather, men should not rape, men should not sexually assault. Imagine what you would say to somebody who's got that mindset. That'll be relevant in a second. So nobody on this panel, nobody in this conference is going to deny that the system is broken. And we heard about that quite clearly. When I'm as a psychologist who both does assessments, I do custody access assessments, I do parenting capacity assessments for the courts, and I work with patients who are going through separations or who have gone through separations or divorces, I have to help people deal with reality. And the reality is the system is broken. And if you spend the rest of your time, or if you have somebody who's going through the system, and you commiserate with them, and all you're doing is ruminating over the fact that it is a corrupt system, it is a system rigged against men on average. There are exceptions. I've worked on cases where women have come out on top, sometimes rightfully so, sometimes it's equal. But the fact is, it's a broken system. So people who get stuck in that mindset of it's not fair, that feeds into a sense of helplessness. It's rage, it's impotent rage, because eventually it becomes despair, futility, and hopelessness. And that's going to make you less active and less effective advocate for yourself and for your children. So if you are going through the system, or if you're trying to help somebody to go through the system, be empathetic. Do your homework. Many people who go through the system, they're talking to the person, and the person's speaking as if, or is listening as if you're crazy. How can you say this? What? Everything you're saying this is not true. This could never happen in a family court or in any court. Well, anyone who's gone through family court knows court is a loose term. Now, I've known many good lawyers and many good judges, but I've also known many people who've gone through it, and I've seen a number of cases where it just blows my mind. Kafkaesque does not begin to describe the process. So you have to let the person understand that you get it, you're there for them, but you need to shift the mentality from I'm a victim of a broken system to how are you going to be your best advocate within this broken system. That's the most important thing you can do, because as you've heard today, there are stereotypes, and as humans we have schemata, we have images that if you say one word, you say dog, people have this image of a certain animal. You say abusive husband, you say bad father, you say anything like alienated parent, and automatically people have a lot of thoughts, feelings, and memories associated with those words. And people want to be able to sleep at night. Nobody wants to make a bad decision. So whether it's a judge, whether it's a lawyer on either side, whether it's the police, Children's Aid Society, a psychologist, anyone involved in the case, they want to believe that they're making the right decision and the best decision for the children. So it's much easier, sadly, to prove something than to prove that it's not real. So if the image of a man is controlling, dominant, possessive, narcissistic, whatever the case may be, and you act even slightly in line with that stereotype, it's going to make it much easier for anyone involved to make the kinds of decisions that would be appropriate for that type of a person, but it might not be appropriate for you. So it is so important to maintain your composure, and this is, I say this all the time, whether I'm dealing with divorce cases, or if I'm helping patients go through WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board, or other insurance problems in their companies, I say, this is going to sound trite, it's going to sound stupid, it's going to sound insulting almost. I say, don't take it personally. What can be more personal than fighting for your kids? Problem is, if you take it personally, you are going to slip up in court or in front of a mediator or in front of the other people I was talking about. You're going to let your emotions get the best of you, and you will act in the manner that they want to see you act. And when I say want to, I mean in the sense that at least it gives them, oh yes, I can make a clear decision. This is the bad guy. So you have to be able to step back. You have to, and what I was mentioning is accumulate facts, get somebody to support you, record everything, and take the most objective step back stance that you can take so that you do advocate best for yourself and your children. And again, I'm saying this with full knowledge that every damn day that you go through the process, you're going to be saying, this is not fair. Like going back to the example I gave with the woman or the parent who wants to let their child go out and party, etc., etc. Yeah, it's not fair that you can't do that, but that is the reality. Fairness, sadly, from a pragmatic standpoint, doesn't play into it. It should, and that's what we're fighting for, and that's all that you want. But if that's not the case, don't succumb to the typical consequence, which is, once again, to kind of lose your stuff and to look really badly. Or to look bad, okay? You also have to be careful, and this is a bit ironic here, I've recommended many parents to go to, or many fathers, to go to cafe, to go and speak with people who can help you out, give you the resources that you might need, give you the support, speak to people who know what you're going through. The irony is that you have to make sure that A, you don't simply just commiserate and ruminate, and again, just all say, yeah, this is really terrible, and I hate the system and so on, because that's disempowering. And B, the reality is, among the people that may be your comrades, so to speak, there will be some people who are not who they say they are. They may deserve to have their children taken away. They may have done some heinous acts to the children or to the parents. Yet they're going to come across just as earnest as you will, at least in speaking about this. So you have to be very careful, because there is a lot of poison within the system, and you need to inoculate yourself from that. You need to surround yourself with good, strong supports who are going to lead you in the right direction, because the people who are not consistent with how they present, the people who present one side and really are something behind that facade, they will take you down the wrong path. So again, this is part of being a strong advocate. This is going to sound silly, but I'm telling you right now, I say this to all my patients, all my students, the best thing you can do is learn how to breathe properly. It might sound trite, but in the moment, and I'm telling you right now, if you've ever had a panic attack, I'm not talking anxiety, I'm talking a full-blown panic attack. I've helped people learn to just breathe through it, so instead of thinking I'm going to die, instead of thinking I'm going crazy, the world's ending, they go, okay, here it comes. Yeah, that was unpleasant, it's going to go away, it's gone, it's gone. Okay? You need to be able to compose yourself in the same way when you are dealing with any of the aforementioned people who are going to be part of the process. If you can learn to breathe slowly, deeply, and rhythmically, you will have a better chance to be able to process the information that's happening in that moment. You're not going to miss things. Lawyers hate when they talk to, I'll speak to this, lawyers hate when they're talking to a client, they're giving them great advice, they're directing them to clients, and going, yeah, bobbing their heads, nodding their heads, and then 5 seconds later, it's clear nothing resonated or registered. You have to make sure that you're attentive to everything that's going on, because that gives you the most ammunition in order to fight the best battle that you're going to fight. And you are in the fight of your life, and it's so important that you can present yourself properly. Don't be your own worst enemy. One thing, and I'm not sure how you feel about this, but I always tell my clients, if you know what type of a partner you have or had, chances are, if you're involved in an ugly custody dispute, one of you, let's hope it's your partner, has a personality disorder. I tell clients, find out whether the lawyer that you're going to work with has experience dealing with the client with a personality disorder. Because if they don't, they're going to be doing the process in a very naive way. And the other person is going to sabotage it, whether that other person gets a lawyer who's just like them, or whether that person trumps the lawyer's best decisions and makes a difficult case. But you have to make sure that they are well adept at dealing with problematic personality types. And sometimes it's tricky. It's really tricky because you don't know what's going to happen. But sometimes you have to take the step, which you don't want to do, but you may have to, involving Child Protective Services. But I say that once you do that, if you don't present yourself properly, the case can go from bad to much worse. Because Children's Aid, and I've done over 500 assessments for the courts for Children's Aid societies across Ontario. And I've worked with hundreds of child protection workers. They're earnest, most of them. They want to do good in the world, but they are humans. They have long histories. And if they see somebody who's getting angry, if the person's staring at them, if they got that piercing gaze, it makes it very easy for them to go, oh, I see what the mother was saying. Yeah, these allegations do make sense. And Children's Aid workers, again, I've worked with so many of them, and they're doing some amazing work, but the fact is, it's very easy for them to be persuaded that something that's not true is true, simply by your demeanor. So if you ever do involve Child Protective Services, now you have another agency which could be the worst nightmare for you, or can finally be the people that bring a bit of structure and maybe hold a partner who's not playing by the rules to account. But use your best judgment, and again, be prepared, because if you play it wrong, it will backfire. And I'll just, because I know the time, we're at the end of our time, I'll stop there. Thank you.
So I think we do have time for one or two quick questions for any one panelist or the whole panel. Jan, you were quick with your
questions for Brian. We have about a 40% divorce rate, and 85% custody goes to the female partner on average. You have a lot of people who've gone through this broken system, and they know and they've been suffering from it. Is it an issue of, and politicians responding to public opinion? You have this massive number of people who know what's going on. What is it missing that it's not translating into more sound policy?
Okay, it's a great question. I'm assuming everybody was able to hear it. But basically, given the divorce rate, which is well above 40% now, the number of people that are affected by the current system, why are we hearing more about it? And if you think about the extended family and friends of people who have actually gone through the system, it's hard to imagine anybody in the country who hasn't been touched by in Ottawa I call it a disaster, by the disaster that our current system is. So why are we hearing more about it? Because that community, which is effectively all of us, isn't vocal enough. So the domestic violence industry has done a tremendous job taking social ill and creating awareness, forcing policy change, moving the dial, and kudos to them. It was a serious social policy issue. This one trumps that because of how pervasive it is in terms of affecting almost every single Canadian. We're just not vocal enough. And since elections is a time where the voice of the public seems to matter, the timing of, if we do the right job on this next public opinion poll and release it in conjunction with the previous ones, and everybody in this room has their local MP to call to say, this is an election issue for them, what's your party's position on this? And you get all of your friends and all of your family members to call so that this voice is heard you'd be surprised.
One more question at the back there.
Okay, so we're all grown adults over here, and it's important for us to realize that the divorce industry in Canada is like a $6 to $7 billion business. In the United States, it's $75 billion business. More money goes to the family court than goes on all the other courts together. I'm very well aware of your noble efforts to repeal 560, and you're a lawyer, right? And there are good people out there. There are people that do collaborative law, don't go to court, they kind of sort it out a little bit. But once this trail of like BG, starts, then the paper trail begins and like $5, $6, $7, $800 an hour. What was particularly important, remember back of the days of the 560, it was like Eddie Kirk that released an article, that published an article speaking about all the psychology about children. And next day, who shot Bill 560 down? It was the lawyers. It was the lawyers' lobby. It was like the next day or 2-3 days after, the same newspaper was the reply to a psychologist about mothers of psychology, child psychology, by a lawyer, saying, no, this is not true, children want the mother.
So just in the interest of time, I'm going to have to ask
So
you
basically,
again.
the question over here is, the peace that I believe we're fighting to a large extent in Ottawa, in the United States, not in Europe, because this is not a European problem, is essentially the lobby and this circle of people that, and this food chain. So, because the evidence is just black and white, and all of the 3 said is black and white. So, what do you think is a strategy towards this? Because we're using aspirin, although it might be that biological, right?
Okay, so question, how do you beat the lobby of the entrenched interests who are making that money? Okay, because social workers, parental coordinators, lawyers, people who work in the court system, etc., they're used to this. This is not that they don't see the contradictions within the system themselves, but to them, this is all good. This is what we do. We're advancing the best interests of children. Canadian Bar Association is somewhere between 30 to 40,000 lawyers. That's it. And within the Canadian Bar Association, there are sections. I'm historically a business lawyer, so I can be a member of the business law section. I'm also a member of the family law section. So the Canadian Bar Association does not speak for me. Real estate lawyers, mergers and acquisitions lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, they're probably in favor of equal parenting. But when the Canadian Bar Association goes to Ottawa, what they say is, we're here, we represent 40,000 lawyers across the country, and we feel strongly. The Canadian Bar Association was not only against equal parenting, they wanted to gut the current maximum contact principle that's been here for 30 years. Okay? Be vocal. We outnumber them thousands of times over. Just be vocal, the numbers will count. Please, everybody, call your MPs, get your family and friends to call your MPs, make your voices heard.
One last.
May I just add just one thing though?
Yeah, very quickly.
Just because the phenomenon of diffusion of responsibility. Everyone here nod your head, go, yes, we're going to call, and you assume someone else will do it. They're not going to do it. You have to take the lead.
I'm glad you added that in. Okay, this will be the last question.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you. It was very strong and logical presentations. Thank you very much for that. My question is, I guess, for Brian. You're sitting beside somebody who has done a lot of Section 30 assessments where they're not lawyers, right? They're sort of a whole mixed bag and different backgrounds and that sort of thing. Were the same stereotypes pretty much the same in your experience in Section 30s, or once you get to Section 30, because it involves a different set of professionals, what's your take on that?
It very much depends. Firstly, a Section 30, which is a forensic analysis of the family, is much to be preferred over any involvement from the Office of the Children's Lawyer in Ontario or private counsel or other children's council, whatever the organization is in the other provinces, because in Canada, the children's council role is not investigative, it's advocacy. Whereas a forensic assessment, whatever it's called in a particular province's legislation, is trying to get at best interests. So you're halfway there. The rest of it depends on who the professional is. Interview them in advance. What is their views before they get to know the family on equal parenting? Do they feel that a worthy father can make as much of a contribution to the children's lives as a worthy mother? And unless they say yes to those, find a different professional. Then the other thing is, you often need an advisor like Oren, or a lawyer like myself, to guide you and prepare you for the assessment. What to do, what to say, what written submissions to put in. So having an advisor during that process, particularly bearing in mind a lot of Oren's comments, is very, very important as well.
I think you do have to pause there with this panel. We're going to take a 1-minute break, so anybody who has questions, maybe that's your chance to come and ask them directly to the panelists. Please don't go anywhere. We're just going to take a 1-minute break to set up. Our next speaker is member of Parliament Karen Vecchio, so you don't want to miss that.